Chapter 31. On Friday, October 27th, 1999, after spending the day with his fiancée, their two children, and her parents at her parents' home in Turlock, Gratton decided to take his family to a local carnival. He was arrested along the way. Officer Tim Helton of the Modesto Police Department Street Terrorism Apprehension Team, STAT, narrated the following police report. Narrative. On 10/27/99 at approximately 20:30 hours, Sergeant Steve May and I were on surveillance of 590 North 1st Street in Turlock, watching for Robert Lee Gratton, who was wanted in connection with these case numbers for sales and transportation of methamphetamine. While at that location, I saw a person emerge from the back of the residence who I believed to be Robert Gratton. As Sergeant May and I continued to watch the residence, we saw what appeared to be two females and a male get into a gray vehicle and leave the residence and begin traveling westbound towards us. As the vehicle passed, the right rear passenger in the vehicle looked toward our plain blue Metro police car, and at that time I positively identified this person as Robert Lee Gratton. We then made a U-turn and contacted Gratton, initiating a traffic stop. I told Gratton that he was under arrest for sales and transportation of methamphetamine and had him step from the vehicle, at which time I handcuffed him. In checking his person, incident to arrest, I found a Pepsi can bottom which had been converted to a heating mantle for fixing heroin. The base of the can had brown residue on it, as well as cotton, which is consistent with persons who use these types of devices to fix heroin. We then did a check of the interior of the vehicle and found no additional contraband. Gratton offered that he did not have a needle on him. The other occupants in the vehicle were Angelica Gonzalez and her mother, Margaret Fielder, as well as a 3-year-old boy and an infant. Angelica Gonzalez was advised of the charges that Gratton would be able to call in approximately an hour from jail. We then began transporting Robert Gratton to the Modesto Police Department, and while doing so, he began talking to us spontaneously. Gratton was very concerned of his crimes and wanted to talk about other crimes that he was aware of and familiar with. After being taken into police custody, Gratton was transported to the Modesto Police Department for further questioning and to determine the value of his information, its reliability, and its sincerity. He was also given a copy of his criminal charges, which read, on October 27, 1999, WWALN, Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office complains and alleges upon information and belief that said defendant did commit the following crimes in the county of Stanislaus, state of California. Count 1, on or about October 27, 1999, defendants did commit a felony, sale of a controlled substance. Come on, man. Did this dude have to fucking put every goddamn penal code and fucking case law in this fucking book? This is crazy, man. I'm gonna read this shit for you guys anyway, man. A felony, sale of a controlled substance, violation of Section 11-379 of the California Health and Safety Code. In that, the defendant did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously sell, furnish, administer, give away, manufacture, compound, transport, and import into this state a controlled substance, to wit, methamphetamine. Special allegation. It is further alleged pursuant to Penal Code Section 186.22b1 that the above offense was committed for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in association with a criminal street gang with the specific intent to promote, further assist in criminal conduct by gang members. Count 2, on or about October 27, 1999, defendants did commit a felony, possession of a controlled substance for sale, violation of Section 11-378 of the California Health and Safety Code, in that the defendant did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously have in his possession for purpose of sale a controlled substance, to wit, methamphetamine. Special allegation. It is further alleged pursuant to Penal Code Section 186.22b1 that the above offense was committed for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in association with a criminal street gang with the specific intent to promote, further assist in criminal conduct by gang members. Count 3, On or about October 27, 1999, defendants did commit a felony, possession of a controlled substance, violation of Section 11377 of the California Health and Safety Code, in that the defendant did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously have in his possession a controlled substance, to wit, methamphetamine. Special allegation, it is further alleged pursuant to Penal Code Section 186.22B1 that the above offense was committed for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in association with the criminal street gang, with the specific intent to promote, assist in criminal conduct by gang members. While at the Modesto Police Department, Sergeant Steve May decided to have Detective George Straw, a gang specialist, step into the fray and evaluate the need for and the importance of Gratton's information. During this interview, Gratton told Detective Straw that he was a high-ranking member of the Nuestra Familia and that he wanted to get out of the gang for quite some time. Gratton also reiterated his willingness to cooperate with law enforcement in return for leniency and protection. This information was then reported to Sergeant May, who assigned Officer Tim Helton to oversee and be in charge of Gratton's case. Officer Helton phoned a few of his colleagues, and Gratton quickly agreed to be interviewed by agents of the FBI Special Task Force who were more than interested in what he had to say. Gratton was transported to the Stanislaus County Public Safety Center, booked, and placed in the maximum security housing unit of the jail. On Thursday, October 28, 1999, Officer Tim Helton arrived at the Stanislaus County Public Safety Center accompanied by Detective George Collard and Detective Carlos Basurdos, both of whom were assigned to the FBI Special Task Force and were scheduled to conduct an early morning interview with Gratton. During the course of the interview, Gratton was made aware of its purpose, the significance of his information, and how he had made quite a name for himself with the GUN production. He was asked if he was willing to assist in the FBI's ongoing investigation into the criminal activities of the Nuestra Familia and its leadership. Gratton said he was, and the information he provided during the interview was transcribed on a Federal Bureau of Investigation's FD 302, which read, Robert Weddle Gratton, protect identity, in parentheses, was interviewed at the Stanislaus County Jail. Present during the interview was Officer Tim Helton, Modesto Police Department. Gratton provided the following information. Gratton stated that he is a member of and is a street captain for the Nuestra Familia NF. He was sponsored by, parentheses, vouched for, into the NF by Fidel Boxer de la Riva, an NF member from Selma, California. Gratton was then made a member into the NF by Robert Brown Bob Viramontes and Art Big Smiley Ramirez. Gratton added that Viramontes was just killed and Ramirez is no longer considered to be in good standings with the gang. Following the status reductions of Viramontes and Ramirez, Gratton found himself being pulled into the current version of the NF by Gerald Rubalcaba. Rubalcaba is his current channel into the leadership of the NF in Pelican Bay State Prison, PBSP. Rubalcaba was the NF leader who told Gratton he'd been promoted to NF Street Captain by the Mesa NF High Command. Gratton spent 5 years in Pelican Bay State Prison, at which time he was celled up with Beluca Valentino Altamirano and Daniel Lizard Hernandez. During this time, he was schooled by Gerald Rubalcaba on the ways of the NF. Gratton reported to Rubalcaba that there was a need to unite the Norteño street gang members into a solid, cooperative group in Northern California. Gratton suggested a Norteño-oriented rap album be produced. Rubalcaba gave him permission after the idea was ratified by the NF leadership. When Gratton paroled in 1997, he resumed an association with David Sardino Rocha, a gangster rapper who had a studio in Tracy, California, and had a production company called Darkroom Familia. The result of their collaboration was the Generations of United Norteños GUN album. The lyrics were penned by various Norteño rap artists connected to Rocha. The Aztec drawing for the insider cover of the album was supplied by Gerald Rubalcaba. The artist of the drawing is unidentified. Gratton has kept Rubalcaba informed of the progress of the album through a series of letters. Gratton uses the name Tina Mendoza when writing to Rubalcaba. Another name used by Gratton is Gotti. Gratton reported that the album did not make as much money as was rumored, and one reason he may be in trouble with the NF leadership is that the NF believes he has not contributed enough money to NF banks from album sales. With regards to homicides or conspiracies to commit homicides, Gratton reported that he personally received verbal and written orders from Gerald Rubalcaba to have more than 2 persons killed for the NF. Gratton has Wila's, kites, or notes in parentheses in Rubalcaba's handwriting asking that hits be carried out. The notes are hidden in a safe place. Gratton will make the notes available to investigators if and when he comes to a suitable agreement with authorities. Gratton reported that a term used in correspondence with the NF leadership to alert that a particular hit has been carried out is the word Disneyland. For example, a gang member writing to a superior would write, "I'm going to Disneyland." That sentence would let the superior know that the assigned task was successfully completed. Gratton acknowledged that a star tattooed on his forehead was a sign that he had completed a hit for the NF. One homicide Gratton was asked to help with was the homicide of Robert Brown Bob Montes. Gratton hinted that he has among his notes from Rubalcaba one that gives specific, though coded, direction to facilitate the killing of Bibi. Gratton refused to say whether or not he got involved in the planning or actual murder of Viramontes. Gratton confirmed that Norteño gang members who deal drugs or make money illegally on the streets are taxed, meaning a portion of the profits are sent to NF leadership through various means. Gratton reported that Tony Patas Hernandez is of unquestionable status in the NF because of his perceived loyalty to outside leader Pablo Pantera Peña. Fidel Spider Fabula, an NF member in Sacramento, California, uses Gratton as his channel. Fabella is in bad standings with the NF because he has been too visible, flashing his colors. Gratton said Spider could hang me if I don't cooperate with you. Gratton explained that Fabella could testify as to Gratton's crimes if Fabella were to cooperate with authorities and Gratton doesn't. Hector Copas Gallegos is a street captain in the Salinas area. Gallegos and Gratton hold the same basic rank within the organization. Gratton said Gallegos is currently in custody in an unknown facility. Enrique Happy Cervantes is a shot caller, NF leader, in parentheses, in the Central Valley. Cervantes was given the status by Gerald Rubalcaba. Curtis Rojo Fisher was at one time going to be a channel for Gratton to use. However, Gratton heard Fisher was demoted, possibly for showing allegiance to the wrong person. Boto, unidentified, is the father of Art Big Smiley Ramirez. Boto still lives somewhere in the Salinas, California area and has still some standing within the NF. Gratton offered to recite the NF Constitution, the bonds, and the format for the Nuestra, Northern Structure prison gang, as well as to detail the breakdown and locations of the NF Colonias regiments. However, time did not permit this during the interview. Gratton also offered to detail the concept of La Familia Capitas, an organization structure being implemented by the NF based on the five families organization of the Italian Mafia. The idea is to keep one family, crew, regiment, etc. from knowing the business of other adversaries of the NF or other divisions of the NF. This way, no one informant in one area can damage the operations of the NF in another area. Robert Gratton is described as a white male, date of birth deleted, 5'7", 170, brown hair, hazel eyes. The very next day, Gratton assumed a new identity and was quickly relocated to an undisclosed section of the Sonora County Jail in Sonora. 2 weeks later, Stanislaus County Deputy Public Defender Greg Spearing was appointed to represent Gratton in his state court criminal case. Gratton was returned to the Stanislaus County Public Safety Center for an extensive follow-up interview. This interview was videotaped and transcribed on an FD-302, which read, "Source, who is in a position to testify, was interviewed at the Stanislaus County, California Sheriff's Department in Modesto, California. Also present were Officer Tim Helton of the Modesto Police Department and sources attorney, Greg Spearing. The meeting was videotaped. The videotapes have been retained as evidence by the Modesto Police Department. History of recruitment into the Nuestra Familia. Source was arrested and convicted on various drug charges in 1989. He was sent to the California Department of Corrections Reception Center at Tracy, California. While at the reception center, he was approached by the following members of the Nuestra Raza, NR, also known as the Northern Structure, NS prison gang. They were Manuel Leon Gonzalez, Tomas Red Rooster Lopez, Robert Littleman Gonzalez, Oscar Ticker Mendoza. Source was recruited and began studying the format and bonds, philosophy, rules, and regulations of the NR. From Tracy, Source was sent to Corcoran State Prison. While on the main line at Corcoran, he met the following Nuestra Familia NF members: Sheldon Skip Villanueva, Jojo Moreno, Richard Huero Bernal, and Johnny Night Owl Perez. In 1989, while under the leadership of Villanueva, Source took his NR schooling to heart and showed he was worthy of being an NR member. His initiation activities were at the direction of veteran NR and NF members, numerous assaults on opposing gang members. He distinguished himself during a prison riot on May 4th, 1989, in which 10 to 15 Sureño gang members were stabbed. The riot had been planned by Villanueva as a diversion, while the real target of the plan, a Mexican mafia member, was stabbed to death in the laundry area. Hold on, let me read that one more time for the naysayers. A Mexican mafia member was stabbed to death in the laundry area. Stabbed to death in the laundry area. I'm just saying though. Source was given orders by Villanueva on several occasions to stab opposing gang members. Attorney Spearing did not allow Source to provide detail. At this time, Source was prospecting for the NF, meaning he was being looked at as a potential member. Source stated that the NR is simply an organization within the prison system, invented and developed by the NF as a recruiting ground for new NF members. One incident described by Source involved the assault on inmate Jack, not further identified. Jack, a Norteño gang member, had been in a fight with NF member James Spanquillo Hermosillo, biting off part of an ear. Hermosillo was eventually convicted of murder in the San Jose NF trials of the mid-1990s and is now on death row. Well, he's actually not on death row no more. He committed suicide. I say he committed suicide about 2 years ago. They found him dead in his cell, overdosed on a shot of heroin. I think he just took a fucking hot shot and said, you know what, the hell with this shit. I'm out of here. Source was ordered by Pistol Pete from Soledad, unidentified, to stab Jack. However, the opportunity to stab Jack never arose. Source eventually got into a fist fight with Jack. This fight was one of a series that resulted in Source being identified as a troublemaker. Source was taken deeper into the confidence of the NF members present. Moreno gave Source the job of distributing shanks to other convicts prior to planned fights. During this time, Villanueva gave Source the position of being in charge of NR members on the yard in the administrative segregation section. However, after several violent incidents, Source was transferred to the Security Housing Unit, SHU. In the SHU, Source was celled with NF member Valentino Palucas Altamoreno. Altamoreno began schooling Source on how to manage NR members and eventually appointed Source to be in charge of the NR members in the SHU. Altamoreno told Source to identify himself as Power to other NR members. Source then spent the next 6 months getting schooled, but not getting involved in serious incidents since there were no enemies, rival gang members, or others considered no good in the SHU. Source learned hand-to-hand combat, history, NF and NR doctrines, and philosophy. Source was also involved in one incident where he proved himself as a willing fighter, again assaulting a black inmate, resulting in a conviction in Kings County on a weapons charge. Source was transferred to the Bedrock area of the SHU, where he met NF member Fidel Boxer De La Riva. Source soon learned that De La Riva was in charge of the whole norteño population of the prison. De La Riva shared his duty with NF member Vincent Chente Arroyo. NF member Daniel Stork Perez was also in the SHU with them. Arroyo and Perez were eventually transferred to a new prison, Pelican Bay State Prison, PBSP. During this time, De La Riva sponsored Source into the NF. Arroyo gave the okay. Source's first assignment as an NF member was to function undercover as an NR member, reporting on the activities of NR members and forwarding reports on various members to NF leaders in Pelican Bay State Prison. During this period, De La Riva ordered Source to assault an Aryan Brotherhood member, Richard Hagler. Source carried out the assault. Source believed Hagler was later strangled and killed by his own gang in Pelican Bay State Prison. Source's duties included teaching NR members while working on his own education. Source memorized the NR formats and bonds regulations. He also worked on improving his own reading, writing skills, and speaking skills. He learned to be fluent in Spanish. At one time, he was assigned to read a dictionary to improve his word power. He was told by De La Riva that the ultimate goal of the NF was to get into white-collar crime and eventually legitimize businesses so that the organization could become self-supporting. De La Riva gave Source the address for a three-way mail drop so he could always get in contact with De La Riva if need be. De La Riva also gave Source a way to get in contact with Vincent Chente Arroyo if Source was unable to reach De La Riva. Source was soon recognized by the prison staff as a leader and transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison. Upon arrival, Source was celled next to Art Big Smiley Ramirez and Robert Brown Bob Viramontes. Other NF members present at the time were Tex Hernandez, Jimmy Wino Siriolski from Oakland, Jimmy Weasel Sanchez from San Francisco, Negro from Madera, not further identified, and Rudy Dancing Bear Miramontes. Imagine that. Source was able to verbally communicate with some of these convicts by using the drains in the yard. Initially, Art Ramirez asked Source for a full report on his source's status. Source refused. Source had earlier been given a list of NF members by De La Riva. Some of these names had dots by them. Those with dots were ones whom Source could reveal his status to. The others were to be kept at arm's length. Robert Viramontes had a dot next to his name. Ramirez did not. This caused some friction between Ramirez and Source until Viramontes stepped in and told Source it was all right to share information with Ramirez. Source was then schooled, instructed more by Ramirez. It was plain to Source that Ramirez was trying to influence as many NF members as possible into seeing him, Ramirez, as the most powerful leader of the NF. Ramirez had enlisted the support of a lot of powerful NF members, including Fred Flaco Estrada and Ralph Rafas Rubio. Soon after, another NF member, Pablo Pantera Peña, took exception to Ramirez's actions and began what amounted to a civil war within the NF. Source was paroled in 1991 or 1992. When he got back to the streets of Modesto, he continued to communicate with Ramirez. In 1992, Source violated his parole and was housed at the Dual Vocational Institute, DVI, in Tracy. There, he began associations with NF members Enrique Happy Cervantes, Rafael Chavo Sanchez from Lodi, Tony Patas Hernandez from Tracy, and Sniper from Sacramento, not further identified. Within the next year or so, Source found that he was unable to get messages to Ramirez. Source later found that Ramirez had been transferred to San Quentin State Prison for eye surgery. Source then thought about trying to communicate with Vincent Arroyo but was unable to because of orders to leave Arroyo alone. Arroyo at this time was under indictment in San Jose and eventually cooperated with law enforcement. Desperate to get mandatory reports to Ramirez, Source gave a coded message to Tony Hernandez to take with him to Pelican Bay State Prison, where Hernandez was going to serve an 8-year sentence. The code was called a 5x5. It used keyword sharp knife for interpretive purposes. This code was used only by higher ranking NF members. Tony Hernandez was not privy to the code and was to be used only as a conduit. Source later learned that Hernandez got to Pelican Bay State Prison and found that Ramirez was gone to San Quentin. Hernandez gave the code report to NF member Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba. Rubalcaba was high enough in the NF to understand the code report. Source soon received a message from Rubalcaba telling him that Rubalcaba would now be his channel, contact person in Pelican Bay State Prison. For the next year, Source and Rubalcaba exchanged messages regarding NF business. Source was admitted into Rubalcaba's section of the NF referred to as the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas were one of 5 different sections of or families in the NF, patterned after the 5 crime families in the Italian mafia. Hey, my Spanish is fucked up. I know I'm destroying that fucking word, but it is what it is, man. This concept was eventually abandoned. In 1994, Source violated his parole and was sent to Pelican Bay State Prison. On arrival, Source was informed by prison staff that Rubalcaba had requested that Source be celled next to him. The request was granted. Source took this as a sign that Rubalcaba was in a position of extreme power in the prison. Source then began a 9-month stint as Rubalcaba's next door neighbor. Rubalcaba schooled Source on the inner circle of NF, appointed him to hold many messages Wheelers received by Rubalcaba from inside and outside the prison. Source was instructed to read the messages and memorize as much content as possible. During this time, there was much turmoil over leadership within the NF. Rubalcaba apparently wanted Source as a witness that certain messages had come to him from other NF leaders in the event there was ever any question as to who was allied with whom. Source monitored messages that said Robert Viramontes needed to be killed. There were other messages regarding the fate of other ranking members. Source's attorney advised him against speaking on these matters at this time. In 1995, Source was promoted to the rank of captain. After paroling, Source was promoted to a Category 3 captain, making him eligible for eventual appointment to the Mesa or High Command of the NF. Lying motherfucker. Source was advised by Rubalcaba to have his photo taken with all NF or NR members who were sent to work with him. This was to keep those persons from later claiming they had no association with Source. Miscellaneous information. Source said that the movie Veteranos be filmed at his house in Modesto. The star of the film, Jesse Borrego, was Source's close in the film. Source has a bit part. Borrego, a well-known actor in Hollywood who has major parts in the movies such as Con Air and Bound by Honor, is a close NF associate. The NF uses the term mob in much of its writings. The NF members are fond of saying mob stands for money over bitches, which is just one more way of telling the membership to raise the main objective of the organization is to raise money and not to get involved with females. And this book is fucked up. Some of the wording is mistyped. So I'm just reading it how it is. An NF member getting out of jail is normally set up with a car, a gun, drugs, and some money. This setup is supposed to get the NF member on his feet and in business for himself. Those who do not take advantage of this opportunity risk severe discipline. There are currently 8 priority targets to be killed by the NF. Source's attorney allowed him to provide two names. One was Hector Copas Gallegos. Gallegos has already been advised and is in protective custody. The other was Pablo Poli Rodriguez. The Modesto police will make appropriate notification. Source said that his brother-in-law is an NF member named Anthony Baby Joker Solis. This was my celly up in Pelican Bay in around 2001. Solis is an NF member who might cooperate with law enforcement if properly approached. I agree with that. And I believe he already did. Source indicated that when a suitable working agreement is reached with the government, Source will provide the names of 100 active NF and NR members. as well as 50 associates and about 100 dropouts. Source said he will provide information on at least 6 homicides, including the homicide of Michael Castillo and Robert Viramontes. Source said he will provide information on about 10 NF owned or backed businesses, 100-pound drug deals, the addresses and method of operation for an upholstery shop which is sewing drugs into the seats of cars. Source reported that he has a close association with Julio Goto Sanchez and the other members of Black and Brown Entertainment in San Francisco. He said he has photos of himself standing with Sanchez. Sanchez's rap album, 17 Reasons, was backed and authorized by the NF. Source described in general terms the origins of the Generations of United Norteños, GUN. His discussions with Rubalcaba in 1996 centered around how to unite the Norteño street gangs. The idea for a gangster rap album was hatched. The songs on the album would be used to urge Norteño gang members to stop fighting one another and to fight with the foot soldiers of the Mexican Mafia, the Sureños, Southern Hispanics. Rubalcaba found this to be a good idea and gave Source permission to pursue this concept on Source's release from prison. Source oversaw the production of the GUN album and has managed the sales and distribution of the monies from the sales. Source said the NF netted about $80,000 from the sales of the album. A portion of the money went to the NF main bank. Source said he was sending about $5,000 a month to the main bank, located in another state. Source said the bank was in Iowa or Idaho. He was more sure of Idaho than Iowa. He has the exact address and some paperwork and will produce the address and other details after his attorney and prosecutors reach an agreement. The amount of money in the bank is subject to change. However, Source claims he could have pulled $100,000 out of it if needed. Source said David Sardano Rocha, who assisted in the production of the GUN album, recently released another album entitled Gang Stories. Rocha did not have permission to put the album out and has come very close to being placed on the hit list. The term Cinco Nueve 59 originated in C Facility, 9 Block, where there were 5 Cinco NF captains housed there at one time. The members of the Mesa, High Command of the NF, give out orders for certain tasks, such as assassinations. However, to protect themselves, they do not ask for details on how tasks were ultimately accomplished. The NF has nominal ties to the. This book is all fucked up, man. I don't know who typed this shit, who edited it, but it's all fucked up. So bear with me. I'm reading it word for word of how it's read. There is an NF member in the Central Valley known as Rock, unidentified. Rock has a brother who is a member of the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels have compromised a number of employees in the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. NF members can get the address information through these employees and their Hells Angels contacts. Source said the NF can also work behind the scenes with some members of the Nazi Lowriders, NLR prison gang. Source is on good terms with 2 prominent members of the gang, Rob and Duke, not further identified from Modesto. Source said Vidal Spider Fabella, an NF member in the Sacramento County Jail, is considered no good target for a hit because of recent brushes with the law that could have been avoided. Fabella's arrest resulted in information on the GUN album getting into law enforcement hands. The NF lists its enemies in the following order: 1. Law enforcement. 2. NF dropouts. 3. Mexican Mafia. 4. Southside government, Mexican Mafia's version of the NR. 5. Aryan Brotherhood. 6. Some black gangs. Tony Patas Hernandez is currently considered to be no good because of his past loyalty to Art Big Smiley Ramirez. After talking with Gratton, Detective Collar felt as if he had hit the lottery. He decided to do some follow-up research pertaining to a coded letter that Gratton had written to Gerald Huete Rubalcaba. The letter, in and of itself, was an important part of Collar's investigative efforts. After obtaining a copy of the original letter in which Gratton confirms Brown Bob had been murdered, Collar realized that Gratton was in fact the missing piece to his puzzle. It was determined that Gratton's information was extremely valuable. Because of his status, it was highly recognized or recommended that he be immediately placed into a witness protection program. Accordingly, on November 3rd, 1999, Special Agent Timothy K. Hammond was assigned to conduct a brief interview with Gratton. The purpose of the interview was to receive an official confirmation that he was willing to cooperate with the FBI. Per FBI procedures, said confirmation is required before an informant can be a protected witness. The transcript of this federal document, FD 302, read, Robert Lee Gratton, protective identity. Date of birth, deleted. Social Security account number, deleted. Was interviewed while in the custody at the Stanislaus County Public Safety Center, Modesto, California. Gratton was advised of certain constitutional rights as outlined in an FBI adverse of rights form and waived these rights. He was advised of the identity of the interviewing agent and the purpose of the interview, and thereafter provided the following information. Gratton was very uneasy about talking openly while incarcerated at the Stanislaus County facility. When asked if he would cooperate with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the Modesto Police Department, MPD, Gratton replied he was willing to provide information on the Nuestra Familia NF gang and testify in court. Gratton said he was no longer in the gang and was trying to move on with his life. He has not written letters to Rubalcaba in approximately 1 year. Gratton referred to his girlfriend and small children as the reason for quitting the gang. Gratton said he would provide valuable information once out of custody. He understands no promises have been made to him for his cooperation. During his brief interview, Gratton said he knew of a hit placed on copas in Salinas, California. Henry Happy Cervantes of Lodi, California, is the person responsible for handling the hit on copas. Upon completion of this interview, Gratton was returned to the Sonora County Jail and spent at least another month in custody there. His safety, however, was an FBI priority. Before anyone at the jail was able to recognize him or verify his true identity, Gratton was quietly relocated to El Dorado County Jail in Placerville, California. At this point, despite his initial loquaciousness, Gratton became hesitant to talk, absent any assurances about how this information might impact his own criminal case. The following was taken from federal court documents. In response to his reticence, assurances were made to Mr. Gratton that his continued cooperation was the best course of action for his case, and that if he continued to cooperate, he would likely receive a sentence of no more than 1 to 2 years on a soft yard. In addition, Mr. Gratton was also assured that if he continued to cooperate, the federal government would place him and his family under the Witness Protection Program, would pay to have his gang-related tattoos removed, and would provide him with $50,000 to $60,000 of seed money. Based on these representations, Mr. Gratton continued to cooperate. It was decided that Gratton would enter a use immunity agreement, which read, Dear Mr. Spearing, the following memorializes the use immunity agreement concluded between the United States and the state of California on the one hand, and Robert Lee Gratton, client, on the other. The terms of this agreement bind the following: the Department of Justice, Criminal Division, Organized Crime and Racketeering Section, the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California, the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of California, the California District Attorney's Office for the Stanislaus County, and the California District Attorney's Office for the Santa Clara County, the offices. With respect to a statement made by client during meetings with agents of the FBI and or with state and local law enforcement officials, either working with the FBI in a federal gang task force or investigating criminal offenses within the Stanislaus or Santa Clara County, and writings prepared by client in connection with such meetings, the following understandings exist. 1. In any prosecution brought against client by the offices except a prosecution for false statements, obstruction of justice, or perjury, the office will not offer in evidence any written or oral statements made by client at the meetings. A. In their case in chief, or B. At sentencing. The offices may use any statements made by client and any other information derived directly or indirectly from the meetings for the purpose of attaining leads to other evidence, which may be used by the offices in any stage of a criminal prosecution, including but not limited to detention, hearing, trial, or sentencing. 2. Notwithstanding paragraph 1 above, the offices may use any statements made by client at the meetings for the purpose A. Should client testify at any judicial hearing, or B. To rebut any evidence offered or factual assertions by or on behalf of client at any stage of a criminal prosecution, including but not limited to detention hearing, trial, or sentencing. 3. It is further understood that this agreement is limited to the statements made or produced by client at the meetings and does not apply to any oral or written statements made or produced by client at any other time. Moreover, the provisions of Fed R Criminal P11E6 and Federal R Evidence 408 and 410 do not apply to any statements made or produced by client at the meetings. No understandings, promises, or agreements have been entered into with respect to the meetings other than these set forth in this agreement, and none will be entered into unless memorialized in writings. On January 18, 2000, with a signed copy of the Use Immunity Agreement as insulation, Gratton submitted to another all-day interview. This interview was transcribed on an FD 302 and read. Source, who was in a position to testify, was interviewed in custody at the El Dorado County Jail. Also participating in the interview was Detective Tim Helton of Modesto Police Department. Source provided the following information. Source handed copies of WILAs, prison slang term for written messages, he received over the last several years from the Nuestra Familia NF leader Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba. Source read each WILA to the investigators and explained its contents. The copied WILAs were retained by the investigators as evidence, and Source explained that he would provide the original WILAs at a later date. A copy of each hand-copied WILA is attached to this FD 302, and the original hand-copied WILAs will be maintained in the 1A section of this file. The following are summaries of information provided by Source regarding each WILA. WILA 1, marked by Source as document 4, 1 of 1. Source explained that this WILA pertained to the new guidelines of how Nuestra Raza NR members are to function, work for the NF while on the streets. Once they have given their commitment to function, NR members are to be assigned to a carnal, NF member, and do whatever is asked of them. The carnal is required to teach the NR members the guidelines, and the NR member must follow all rules and fulfill their word commitments to the fullest, or be subject to NF discipline. The WILA ends, corn 315, that's corny, which Source believes to mean that the document was generated by NF member Cornelio Corny Tristan. Source said that Tristan was in charge of all NF street operations. True that. WILA 2, Source explained that this WILA was to make all NF members aware that the dilemmas at Pelican Bay were being investigated, and those who were found in violation of NF rules will be held to answer. Source said the dilemma at Pelican Bay is referring to the problems the NF is having with the dissension of several influential NF members who have been causing problems for the NF and D facility at Pelican Bay State Prison. Primarily NF members Arthur Big Smiley Ramirez, Pablo Pantera Peña, and Robert Brown Bob Viramontes. Source said that WILA also explains that Big Smiley is being demoted to a Cat 1 member and that Viramontes' NF status is on freeze. It also explains that Viramontes is now on parole and has no authority. The WILA also mentions any NF member who talks about or second guesses the investigation or takes direction from Art Ramirez and Source Viramontes will be charged with treason. Source said this WILA was received prior to the 1999 homicide of Viramontes. WILA 3, marked by Source as document 1 of 2. Source said this WILA is primarily about NR and how the NR is defeating the goals of the NF organization. This WILA is basically an edit for all NF members to adhere to and enforce, and is a modification to the NR bonds and format rules and regulations. Source explained that NR members had been paroling to the streets with ideas that they controlled their own manpower without the guidance and acceptance of the NF. Source said that this WILA is establishing that effective immediately, all NR members paroling from the county jails or prisons must be under the guidance and direction of the mob, NF. Any NR member wanting to function past Bond 13 will be screened and assigned. Bond 13 states that upon release from prison, an NR member is obligated to send money to two NF members still in custody. However, all NR members who do not choose to go beyond Bond 13 are still responsible for their own actions on the streets. Source explained that since the NR has hindered the goals of the NF, the NR will no longer exist outside of prison. WILA 4, marked by sources, document 2A, 1 of 1, and 2B, 1 of 1. Source said that this WILA was given to him by NF member Blackie after Blackie paroled from Pelican Bay State Prison. In the WILA, Rubalcaba explains to Source that Blackie has been with him in Pelican Bay for 3 months and has been sent out with instructions for Source. For security reasons, Blackie was supposed to brief Source on the details of this priority work and what exactly needs to be done. Source believes Blackie's true name might be Jacob Enriquez. Rubalcaba wrote that Source must tighten up his security and start producing so that all those working under Rubalcaba will have results and become more self-supporting. Source said that he could tell by reading the WILA that Rubalcaba was upset with them. Rubalcaba wrote that he had sent two NF members to help Source, but Source has continued to keep him tied off, uninformed. Rubalcaba wrote, "Where's the money? You've been out long enough and now have the manpower, so work it." Rubalcaba asked Source what Abe, code for NF member Vidal Spider Fabella, had done since Source Rubalcaba has done to assist Source. Rubalcaba also wanted to know what Fabella did to get arrested. He wrote, if Fabella was arrested for flying colors, gangbanging, then it would be considered straight up negligence on Fabella's conduct. In this WILA, Rubalcaba also complains that Source continued to send information without using code. Rubalcaba wrote that Source needs to start writing in code and putting security on everything. Again, Rubalcaba writes that he wants Source to work hand in hand with Blackie and writes that Blackie already has a special assignment and some other work that is already authorized. Rubalcaba wrote that Source must work close with Blackie and their assignment must take precedent over everything else. Source told the investigators that Source and Blackie had been assigned to kill Viramontes and that Blackie was to brief him on how it was going to be handled. The letter was assigned Zapata, which Source said is the code name used by Rubalcaba. WILA 5, marked by Source as document 3A of 2, 3B, 1 of 2. This WILA from Rubalcaba to Source states and requests the following. Art Big Smiley has been demoted to Cat 1, NF member, and holds no authority in the mob. Robert Brown Bob Viramontes, NF status is on freeze, and he holds no authority in the O. Viramontes recently paroled, and should he contact Source is not to let him dictate anything. If Source knows the address of Fat Girl's mate, Art Ramirez is Fat Girl, and his cellmate was Viramontes, then Source is to forward the address to Rubalcaba, then make preparations to handle it. Kill Viramontes, according to Rubalcaba. Viramontes has done a lot of damage to the NF and his actions will not be tolerated. Rubalcaba wrote that Source is the underboss of his Zapata family, another name for Rubalcaba's NF street regiment. Source listed the names of the Zapatistas. Again, I'm fucking that word up, man. Members of the mid-1998. A copy of that list is attached to and made part of this FD 302. Source's name has been deleted from the original list to protect his identity. Rubalcaba wants Source to establish himself and get some money-making ventures together. Rubagaba explains that the NR will no longer exist on the streets and all NR members must fall under the direction and authority of NF members. Rubacaba instructed that if Jokes and Paya, Anthony Solis, and Abe Moreno want to work, then they will fall under the direction of his Zapata family. Rubacaba wrote in this wheeler that Muskie, with a possible last name of Ramirez, and Rudy, possibly Rudy Ramirez, are trying to get something together in his, Rubacaba's, home county of Tulare. Muskie and Rudy will fall under work for Source. Rubacaba wrote he will try to get Source some help, i.e. manpower. He wrote his intentions are to acquire a stronghold in Tulare County, but will let that infringe on Source's plans to establish house wherever Source sees fit. Rubacaba wants Source to keep the manpower in order and to start a car club as a way to use as front to invest our NF money legit. Shit don't make sense. But these dudes are dinosaurs, man. He wants these guys to start a car club. These motherfuckers are stuck in the 70s. They have no idea what kind of fucking technology we're up against. They still have a vision of what it was like in the 70s, and they're still trying to operate like that on the streets. That's what these motherfuckers never understood. Rubacaba will allow Source to name the club, but eventually wants to know the name. Rubacaba wrote that he had spoken to C, who said that changes must be made to rectify injustices made by Gorda and her mate, another reference to NF members Art Ramirez and Robert Viramontes. Looking back at the situation involving Ramirez and Viramontes, Rubacaba wrote he should have made the changes long ago, but that he is one to look at the best interest. Source said that C referred to here is NF member Cornelio Corny Tristan. Rubacaba wrote that Source's ideas and suggestions are welcomed and that Source is to run the family, NF, out there, and remember that he, Rubacaba, was there for him. Source is not to write to any other C's, carnales, unless Rubacaba tells him to do so. Rubacaba explains to Source that he needs to remember that once he starts making money, 25% of that off the top must go to the O and that no one can mess with that money. Once the total reaches $5,000, Rubacaba will let Source know where to put it. Rubacaba wants Source to establish a runner person to transport items for the money. Rubacaba wrote that he had sent Source a coded message on the inside bottom flap of a big envelope and wanted to know if Source understood it. Rubacaba mentioned having sent separate letters containing the codes and code meanings. Rubacaba wrote he had access to the Linea mainline where inmates are selling crank at a rapid pace. He mentioned wanting to send a few ounces of crank into the mainline to make some money for us. Rubacaba wanted Source to give the drugs to Vatos dudes, Ruka girl, and have her bring the drugs in the PBSP through a visit and pass on the drugs to an inmate housed in the mainline, which would be more profitable. Rubacaba explained that Conejo and Milo were out in the mainline and could sell drugs for them. Rubacaba wrote he wanted to invest a pound of crank into the venture, but to start with, Source only needed to send a couple of ounces. Rubacaba gives his word that he will work with Rubacaba, wrote that the Ruka lived in Sacramento, California. Rubacaba wrote that it would be easy money and wrote that 1 gram could be sold for $200 to $300 with 25% going to the NF. He wrote he had already told a person on the main line that he would be sending him the crank and that he was waiting for his person to give him the Ruka's phone number. Rubacaba wrote that Source should also try to get someone to visit him, Rubacaba in the shoe, to pass the drugs. However, Rubacaba mentioned that Source should not get just anyone. Rubacaba ended this wheeler by writing, the money for the family must be invested when it can into legitimate businesses and investments. Source explained that the money that was for the NF was to be sent to the main bank in Idaho. He believes his own code name for the person in charge of the bank is Janice. However, he didn't know if Janice was male or female. Source said he had documents secreted somewhere that would refresh his memory on the bank. He believes he sent at least 25 or $30,000 to the main bank. Wheeler 6, marked by source as document 5, 1 of 1. This Wheeler is a letter to source explaining how source is to decipher what information is to be sent to which NF member. The information will be coming from Rubagaba through source. Rubagaba wrote that the underlined word at the beginning of any letter or Wheeler would be the code as well as to who should receive it. Source said that this Wheeler was delivered to him by NF member Vidal Spider Favela. He said Rubagaba gave it to Favela while they were in PSPB, Pelican Bay State Prison, and instructed him to deliver it to Source upon paroling from PBSP. Source said Favela delivered it about 2 weeks after his parole release. Source stated that this is the Wheeler that would sink everybody. In this Wheeler, Rubagaba explains the following to Source. Source is to be careful with regards to recruiting manpower and or for the NF so as not to allow anyone who is untrustworthy. Recruits do not need to have a criminal record, but must have a criminal-oriented mentality. Rubagaba wrote, "We are organized crime and need those with no prison history or who have the burden of law enforcement agencies on their activities. Should you ever encounter prospects that are of high caliber assets for the O, then you must consider options. The O needs those who have such resources and legitimate ties that can help achieve our adversaries, help achieve our advancement." Rubagaba wrote that the prospects must understand street functions and procedures and must understand the expectation that when duty calls, they will have to put their work in. Same as a soldier battles for his country, a mob soldier battles for the Familia. Rubagaba explained that any prospect would not be exposed as an NF member while on the streets, but only in the event that they were incarcerated. He also added that these types of people would not be suspected of being mob related, nor would people feel threatened by them at all, because they would deceive others easier than those who have criminal records or are known criminals. Source described the following part of this Wheeler by saying, "This is the real heavy part right here." Rubagaba wrote that when Source meets with Rudy Ramirez to tell him that Danny Devisa, Visalia, California, must be put to sleep, killed, no exceptions. Rubagaba also wants Source to get him an address of the Moscow NF term for the Mexican Mafia member Victor Murillo Devisa because he is to be dealt with, killed. Source explained that Rubagaba wanted Murillo to be killed in a way that no one would suspect that it was an NF hit, even if it meant placing Murillo's fingers in the formation of the number 13 so as to seem that he was killed by a Sureño gang member. Rubagaba instructed Source to get the information on Murillo's whereabouts, and then he, Source, could get one of his boys and NF subordinates to handle it, kill Murillo. Source said Victor Murillo and his son were recently killed in separate incidents. Also in this Wheeler, Rubagaba tells Source that Cafe, the late Robert Viramontes, must be dealt with and expressed that it should be considered priority. Rubagaba explained that Favela would be able to assist Source and explained how he wanted Source to handle it. Rubagaba wrote that he had given Source's phone number to Rocky's mate, who would then be in contact with Cafe. Rocky's mate would then contact Source and advise him of Cafe's whereabouts. Rubagaba continues on with, "We can't let Cafe cause any more corruption. This one killing will put a big impact on all and will fall in place to what the NF is about." Source explained that Cafe was another name used to identify NF member Robert Viramontes. At this time, the identity of Rocky's mate is unknown, but Source said Rocky is NF member David Big Rock Ramirez from San Jose. I'll tell you who this was. This was Chavo from Hayward, Anthony Jacobs. That was who Rock was sold up when all this shit was happening. I was there in C7 or C11 at that time with these cats. So That's who they're referring to when they say Rocky's mate. Rubalcaba informed source that the following needed to be dealt with also: Sueño, Pilo de Salas, Chato, OG, Poli, and all NF dropouts in the area of Modesto, California. Source identified Sueño as Isaac Dimas, an NF member from Sacramento, California. Rubalcaba wrote that Sueño has to be dealt with only if he didn't make himself right. He mentioned that Sueño can locate and kill Pilo. Source, however, said that Sueño was already on the list and is going to be killed. Source identified Pilo as NF member Frank Miranda from Salinas. Source identified OG and Chato as Joe Ramirez and Chato Ramirez, respectively. Source said Joe and Chato are brothers and are originally from San Jose. Source said that both are currently in custody in the Stanislaus County Jail, and Joe was recently sentenced to serve 10 years for several robberies. Source identified Poli as Pablo Rodriguez. He said that Rodriguez should currently be incarcerated at Folsom State Prison on AR. Source said he once ordered a hit on Rodriguez, wherein Rodriguez's face got sliced and required 50 or something stitches. He said the assault occurred in Tracy, California at Dual Vocational Institute, DVI. Source identified Juan Toro Bajaran as the main NF dropout in the Modesto area that Rubalcaba wanted hit. Source said he believes Bajaran is in custody somewhere. He added that Bajaran was once the bodyguard of NF General Robert Babo Sosa. Rubalcaba wrote he wanted Source to use his direction or his discretion when considering the killing of a dropout in the Modesto area because he did not want to draw any heat, law enforcement attention to that neighborhood area. He mentions that in order to take over Modesto, we can't have a lot of trash to threaten our activities. Rubalcaba wrote that Miko Garza was recently paroled from Fresno, California from PBSP and could be contacted and told if he wanted to function, he would have to function under the authority of Source. Rubalcaba advised Source that Favela could show him how to use legal mail for NF business and reminded Source to put 25% of all money earned for the organization. Rubalcaba wanted to know how much money Source currently had for the organization. Source said that at that time he had $25,000. Rubalcaba wrote that he had sent Samantha to deliver the NF Constitution and bonds to Source. Source identified Samantha as Sammy Cuellar, the nephew of Mexican Mafia member Victor Murillo. In this wheeler, Rubalcaba mentions that the Ruca Brenda Pobre wants to visit him at PBSP. He is trying to utilize her and that he is trying to get her to look out for a guy. Rubalcaba wrote he would be sending Source's phone number to NF member Michael Castillo so Castillo could be able to contact Source. Source explained that Castillo, Copas, Hector Gallegos, and everybody else was working under him. Rubalcaba ordered Source to somehow meet with Chuy de Visalia. He wanted Source to hand deliver the new bonds and format to Chuy and to make sure he understood that the NR no longer existed on the streets. Rubalcaba advised Source that Chuy would also be able to give Source the whereabouts of MA member Victor Murillo. Rubalcaba ended this wheeler by stating that only Source and Fabella were to read its contents. Wheeler number 8, marked by Source as document 9A, 1 of 2, and 9B, 1 of 2. Rubalcaba begins this wheeler by referring to Source as Chuy. He then wrote he had received the information regarding the issues with George, Chendo, and Littles, and that all those declared no good are to be kept away from our activities. Again, Rubalcaba mentions that the NR no longer exists on the streets and the bonds and format have been restructured. He mentions that any NR member who chooses to go beyond the 13th bond and wants to operate on the streets with the people will no longer function as NR, but will under the guideline or guidance and direction of the NF. Rubalcaba added that anyone who does not function in this manner can't use the flag of the NR for illegal activities. He also wrote that those who don't indulge in illegal activities but work or profit legitimately can also be used sending some funds on a monthly basis to a designated individual here at Pelican Bay State Prison, whether it's $20, $35, or whatever. Rubalcaba wrote, only the NR members who have been approved by headquarters will receive any authority and support from the mob. Rubalcaba wrote that he is continually receiving information about an NR member known as Pee-wee de Porros, who has a following of members who have put policies in effect, yet they are not even under our approval. Source said Rubalcaba told him Pee-wee needs to be hit. He said Rubalcaba expected him to handle it with the help of NF member Rudy Reyes. Rubalcaba wrote that Source needs to stop all the youngsters, Norteño street gang members, from killing one another because it only served to allow the M.A. and the Sureños the freedom to flourish in predominantly Norteño cities and neighborhoods without fear of danger or retaliation. Rubalcaba mentioned that the NF has taken a lot of heat and pressure from law enforcement because of things that NR members have done without approval from the NF. Rubalcaba ended this wheeler by writing, I don't appreciate being played and misinformation. This shit is dead. And by signing the wheeler Cuete. Wheeler number 9. A copy of the wheeler has not been provided to investigators, but the following is information contained in the wheeler and provided by Source. He believes this wheeler was written in 1997 or 1998. Source said Rubalcaba wrote him with the instructions to send Conejo de Sanjo some crank. He wrote that Conejo was in high desert prison and this would be a test run for Source. Rubalcaba asked Source to talk to Isaac Sueño Dimas and put him back on track. He wrote that Dimas was good and needed to be pushed. Rubalcaba wanted Dimas to work under Source. Rubalcaba wrote that Dimas has been out of prison for 3 years and has yet to produce. Rubalcaba wanted Dimas to be fined $5,000 for not having produced. Source said Rubalcaba wrote, the fat lady's lover needs to be touched, which Source said he understood to mean Rubalcaba wants to kill Robert Brown Bob Viramontes. Source explained that NF member Art Ramirez is referred to as the fat lady, and Viramontes is referred to as his lover because of their close relationship. Wheeler number 10, marked by Source as document 16-1 of 1. This wheeler is the list of NF captains and their rankings from 1 to 12, with captain number 1 having the most authority and influence and number 12 having the least. 1. DC David Cervantes. 2. Cuete Gerald Rubalcaba. 3. Skip Sheldon Villanueva. 4. Conejo James Perez. 5. Michael Castillo. 6. Blondie Jose Gonzalez. 7. Stork Daniel Perez. 8. Big Rock David Ramirez. 9. Chispas Rene Ortiz. 10. Boxer De Selma Fidel De La Riva. 11. Sleeper De Sanjo Victor Escobar. 12. Wino de Oakland James Sirioski. Source said if he were in Pelican Bay State Prison, he would be captain number 3, bumping those below him down a ranking. After this interview, you foolish shit, boy. There was no second guessing. Gratton would play a major role in a top secret multi-task force investigation into the criminal activities of the NF leadership, dubbed Operation Black Widow, led by the FBI. Gratton had star witness potential, and it was decided that Gratton's drug case be charged in federal rather than state court. Gratton was transferred to a federal detention center in Dublin, California.